Chapter 1. The Discovery. Nora Blackwell had a precise system for cataloging historical artifacts, just as she had systems for nearly everything else in her life. Wake at 6:30, brew exactly 12 ounces of Earl Grey tea, read 40 pages of whatever historical monograph was currently on her nightstand. The systems provided order, structure, a framework that held her world together when so little else seemed anchored. The attic of Harrison Montgomery's Victorian mansion on Beacon Hill presented a direct challenge to her carefully ordered existence. 3 generations of historical artifacts sat in haphazard piles, stuffed into trunks and wrapped in yellowing sheets. The air was thick with dust, visible in the slanting rays of afternoon sunlight that pierced through small dormer windows. 2 months, she muttered to herself, pushing her wire-rimmed glasses up her nose with one knuckle. They expect me to catalog this entire collection in 2 months. She tucked an errant strand of auburn hair back into her practical bun and returned to the leather portfolio she'd been examining. The Boston Athenaeum had been thrilled when she'd secured this project. Harrison Montgomery's collection was legendary among archivists and historians. They were extensive, valuable, and notoriously disorganized. The eccentric philanthropist had died 3 months ago, leaving his entire collection to the public archives with detailed, if somewhat cryptic, preservation instructions. At least he had bothered to save everything, she said to the empty attic, her voice echoing slightly under the slanted ceilings, even if he saved it in complete chaos. She carefully extracted another sheaf of correspondence from the portfolio, checking the dates and sorting them chronologically on the folding table she'd set up as a workstation. She'd been at this for 10 hours already today, and her apartment, small but comfortingly filled with books and historical ephemera of her own collection, seemed very far away. The next envelope made her pause. Unlike the others, this one had an unusual postmark. It was iridescent, almost shimmering, seeming to shift colors as she tilted it in the light. "That's odd," she murmured, carefully opening the aged envelope with her archival tools. Inside was a letter written on parchment in elegant script, the ink faded but still legible. She began to read. "My dear Montgomery, I write to you regarding our discussion of the Fountain of Possibilities. I have at last deciphered the final coordinates and symbols, which I have illustrated on the enclosed map. The journey will not be easy, but I believe the stories we have collected about its properties are more than mere legend. I intend to make the expedition within the fortnight. Should you wish to join me, you know where to find me. With highest regards, E.P." Beneath the signature was a postscript. 42 Commonwealth Avenue, Boston. Nora carefully unfolded the accompanying map. It was beautifully drawn, with precise coordinates and a series of symbols she didn't recognize, surrounding what appeared to be the location of a cave system. "The Fountain of Possibilities," she read aloud, tracing the delicate lines with her eyes. As a specialist in 19th century New England history, she'd never encountered any reference to such a place. Outside, thunder rumbled. The summer storm that had been threatening all afternoon was finally breaking. Rain began to patter against the roof, softly at first, then with increasing intensity. She examined the date on the letter, which was August 15, 1884, and checked the signature against Montgomery's journals. E.P. must be Dr. Elliot Pierce, a cartographer mentioned several times in Montgomery's papers. The connection made her pulse quicken with the thrill of historical detective work. A sharp crack of thunder made her jump, and a moment later she heard an ominous dripping sound. Looking up, she saw water beginning to seep through the ceiling directly above her workstation. "No, no, no!" Nora leaped from her chair, frantically gathering papers to protect them from the emerging leak. She grabbed at the letter and map, but as her fingers touched the strange postmark, a perfect droplet of rainwater fell from the ceiling and landed precisely on it. The postmark began to glow, a vibrant blue light emanating from where the water had touched. A tingling sensation shot up her arm. "What the..." The room started to spin around her. Colors blurred, sounds distorted, and Nora felt as if she were being pulled apart and reassembled simultaneously. Her last coherent thought was that no archival training had prepared her for this. Then everything went black. Chapter 2. The clattering of hooves and iron wheels against cobblestone jolted Nora to consciousness. She opened her eyes to find herself sprawled in the middle of a busy street, a horse-drawn carriage bearing down on her. "Watch yourself, miss," the driver shouted, yanking the reins to swerve around her. Nora scrambled to her feet, heart pounding. The street was filled with carriages and horses. Men in top hats and women in bustled dresses streamed along the sidewalks. The air tasted different. It was thick with coal smoke and horse manure, lacking the subtle tang of exhaust fumes she was accustomed to. "What kind of historical reenactment is this?" she whispered, clutching the letter and map still in her hand. She looked down at her modern clothing, jeans, comfortable flats, and a blue blouse, which stood in stark contrast to the Victorian fashion surrounding her. People were staring, some pointing and others whispering behind gloved hands. A woman pulled her young daughter closer as they passed, as if Nora's modern attire might be contagious. "Excuse me," she approached a gentleman at the corner. "Is this some sort of historical event? For tourists?" The man looked her up and down with undisguised disdain. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean, madam, and I must say, your attire is most inappropriate." He tipped his hat stiffly and walked away. A newsboy's voice cut through her confusion. "Extra! Extra! Mayor Hugh O'Brien addresses Water Commission scandal. Read all about it." Nora moved toward him on unsteady legs. "Excuse me, what's today's date?" The boy, no more than 12, with a smudged face and cap too large for his head, gave her a curious look. "It's August 17th, miss." "And the year?" He laughed. "It's 1884, of course. Are you feeling well, miss? You don't look very good." Nora fumbled in her pocket and pulled out a handful of modern coins. "Can I have a paper?" The boy examined her coins with fascination. "What strange money. Is it foreign?" Yes, foreign." Her mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Time travel wasn't possible. She must have hit her head when she fell. Or maybe the leak in the attic had contained some hallucinogenic mold. She moved to the edge of the sidewalk, trying to process her surroundings. The buildings looked authentic in ways no reproduction could achieve. No hidden speakers playing period music, no subtle signs of modern infrastructure, no smartphones in the hands of hidden tourists. "This can't be real," she muttered. But everything felt solid and substantial. She could smell the horse manure in the street, the coal smoke in the air, and the perfume of a passing woman. In the distance, Nora recognized the outline of the Massachusetts State House with its distinctive golden dome. Beyond it, where skyscrapers should have stood, there was only open sky. A cold wave of panic washed over her. If this wasn't a hallucination, if by some impossible means she had actually traveled to 1884, she was in serious trouble. She had no period-appropriate clothing, no local currency, no identification, and nowhere to stay. Then she remembered the address from the letter, 42 Commonwealth Avenue, the home of EP Dr. Elliot Pierce. Commonwealth Avenue wasn't far, and the elegant homes of Back Bay would still be relatively new in 1884. Nora clutched the letter tighter and began walking, trying to ignore the stares her clothing attracted. As she walked, she mentally cataloged the differences between this Boston and her own. Buildings that had been renovated or demolished in her time stood pristine in their original form. Horse-drawn carriages and early omnibuses replaced cars and buses. The air smelled worse, but the street seemed more alive somehow, filled with vendors and conversations rather than people hurrying with eyes fixed on screens. Finally, she arrived at a handsome brownstone with a small brass nameplate beside the door. Dr. Elliot Pierce, cartographer. Nora took a deep breath, tucked the letter into her pocket, and arranged her face into what she hoped was a confident expression. She had spent her entire adult life studying this era. If anyone could navigate 1884, surely it should be her. She climbed the steps and knocked firmly on the door. As she waited, she hastily concocted a story. She would claim to be delivering documents from Harrison Montgomery, knowing from her research that Montgomery would be alive in this era. It wasn't perfect, but it might get her through the door. The heavy door swung open, and Nora found herself face to face with a tall man dressed in a waistcoat, with his shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms stained with ink. He had a neatly trimmed beard and intelligent hazel eyes behind wire-framed spectacles. He regarded her with obvious surprise and suspicion. "May I help you, madam?" His voice was deep, cultured, with the distinctive Boston Brahmin accent she had only heard in old recordings. Nora swallowed hard. "Dr. Elliot Pierce? I have a delivery from Harrison Montgomery." Chapter 3. Dr. Pierce's eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly as he examined her from head to toe. I was unaware that Mr. Montgomery had begun employing women in such unusual attire as his messengers. Behind him, Nora could see an impressive study with walls covered in maps and charts. A large drafting table occupied the center of the room, littered with instruments and papers. "It's a rather special circumstance," Nora replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "May I come in? The delivery is of a somewhat sensitive nature." He hesitated, his hand still on the door. "I'm afraid I'm rather occupied at present, Miss Blackwell. Nora Blackwell." She had considered inventing a name, but decided that in her current state of shock, she'd be more likely to remember her real one. "Miss Blackwell, I'm not expecting any delivery from Mr. Montgomery. Perhaps you've mistaken the address." Desperation made her bold. "It concerns the fountain of possibilities." His expression shifted subtly, surprise, followed by wariness. After a moment's calculation, he stepped aside. "You'd better come in." The interior of the house was exactly as she would have expected for an upper-middle-class Victorian home, with dark woodwork, patterned wallpaper, and ornate furniture. The study where he led her was different, much brighter, more functional, and gloriously chaotic. "Please, have a seat," he said, indicating a leather chair across from his desk. He remained standing, maintaining the position of authority. "Now, what's this about Montgomery and a fountain?" Nora extracted the letter from her pocket. "I believe this will explain better than I can." Dr. Pierce took the letter, suspicion still evident in his posture. As he read, his expression changed from skepticism to intense interest. He examined the map with professional precision, using a magnifying glass from his desk. "Where did you get this?" he asked finally, looking up at her with new intensity. "I told you, from Mr. Montgomery." "Impossible. This letter is in my hand, addressed to Mr. Montgomery, yet I haven't written it." He set the pages down carefully. "And these symbols, they match my private research I've shared with no one." Nora hadn't expected this complication. "Perhaps Mr. Montgomery has sources you're unaware of." Dr. Pierce leaned against his desk, studying her. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you might tell me the truth about who you are and how you came by this document." His directness caught her off guard. The truth would sound impossible. "I study impossibilities, Miss Blackwell. Try me." Before she could respond, a sharp knock at the study door interrupted them. A stern-faced older woman entered, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun, and her posture rigid with disapproval. "Dr. Pierce, I heard voices. I wasn't aware you were expecting company." Her pointed glance at Nora made it clear she found the visitor inappropriate. "Ah, Mrs. Winters, this is Miss Blackwell. She's a colleague who has brought some research materials of interest." He turned to Nora. "Mrs. Winters, my housekeeper." The older woman's expression made it clear she didn't believe a word of it. "A colleague? I see. And will your colleague be staying for dinner?" Dr. Pierce looked at Nora thoughtfully. "I believe she might be staying longer than that. Miss Blackwell appears to have had some misfortune with her luggage, Mrs. Winters. Would you be so kind as to see if any of my sister's things might fit her? I believe Margaret left several dresses after her last visit." Mrs. Winters' lips thinned with disapproval. "As you wish, sir. Though I must say, thank you, Mrs. Winters." His tone was polite but firm, ending the conversation. After the housekeeper departed with a final disapproving glance at Nora's jeans, Dr. Pierce returned his attention to her. "Now, Ms. Blackwell, I suggest you tell me the truth. Your accent is American but peculiar. Your clothing is unlike anything I've seen. You possess a letter I apparently wrote, but didn't write, containing information few people know." His eyes narrowed. "Who are you, really?" Nora took a deep breath. She needed his help, and lying further would only complicate matters, but the full truth seemed dangerously unbelievable. "I'm an archivist. I specialize in 19th century New England history." She paused. "That letter was in Harrison Montgomery's collection, which I was cataloging when something happened. I don't understand it myself." "When something happened?" he repeated skeptically. "When I was transported here to 1884. I know how that sounds." To her surprise, Dr. Pierce didn't immediately dismiss her claim. Instead, he sat down behind his desk, steepling his fingers. "You're suggesting time travel. I know it's impossible. Is it?" He studied her intently. Do you have any proof of this extraordinary claim? Nora reached into her pocket and produced her smartphone. The battery was low, but still functioning. This is a telephone, but it also takes photographs, accesses a global information network, plays music, and more. She turned it on, the screen illuminating with her lock screen, which was a photo of the Boston Public Library. Dr. Pierce approached cautiously, examining the device without touching it. "Remarkable," he murmured. "May I?" She handed it to him, and he turned it over in his hands with scientific precision, studying every detail. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary. No visible fasteners. This glass screen." He handed it back. "I can't explain this technology, which suggests you're either from the future or a very accomplished fraud with access to inventions unknown to modern science." "I'm not a fraud," Nora said wearily. "I just want to figure out how to get home." Mrs. Winters returned with an armful of clothing. "These might do, though they'll need taking in. The young lady is rather slight compared to Miss Margaret." "Thank you, Mrs. Winters. Perhaps you could show Miss Blackwell to the guest room." The housekeeper sniffed. "Very well, follow me, miss." As Nora stood to follow, Dr. Pierce spoke again. "We'll continue our discussion in the morning, Miss Blackwell. Perhaps after a night's rest, you'll feel more comfortable sharing the complete truth of your situation." "I've already told you the truth," Nora replied, "unbelievable as it is." A flicker of something, curiosity perhaps, showed in his eyes. "Then tomorrow we'll discuss this fountain that apparently interests both of us, across time itself." In the small guest room, after Mrs. Winters had departed with clear reluctance, Nora sat on the edge of the bed examining her modern possessions. Smartphone, keys, wallet with credit cards and ID. Everything that defined her in 2023 was useless here. She stared out the window at the gaslit streets of 1884 Boston. "Have I gotten myself into?" she whispered to the empty room. Chapter 4. Morning arrived with a soft knock at the guest room door. Mrs. Winters entered, carrying a basin of steaming water, her expression no warmer than it had been the previous evening. "Dr. Pierce expects you for breakfast in 30 minutes, Miss Blackwell." She set down the basin on a washstand. "I've laid out Miss Margaret's clothes on the chair. I've no experience as a lady's maid, so you'll have to manage on your own." Nora eyed the elaborately layered Victorian outfit with trepidation. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters. I'm sure I'll figure it out." The housekeeper sniffed. "I'm sure you will. You seem a most resourceful young woman." She paused at the door. "The doctor was up all night in his study. I've never seen him so animated about his research. Whatever document you brought him has quite captured his attention." After Mrs. Winters left, Nora approached the clothing with the determination of someone about to perform surgery. She'd studied Victorian fashion extensively, but had never actually worn it. "Chemise first," she muttered, picking up the thin white undergarment. Then corset, then petticoat. 20 frustrating minutes later, she had managed to dress herself in a blue day dress with a modest bustle. The corset was laced loosely enough to breathe and move, but tight enough to reshape her modern posture into something appropriately Victorian. She twisted her hair into a simple bun and surveyed herself in the mirror. Not period perfect, but it'll have to do. Breakfast was served in a formal dining room, with heavy curtains filtering the morning light. Dr. Pierce was already seated, a cup of coffee and several open books before him. He rose politely when she entered. "Good morning, Miss Blackwell. I trust you slept well?" His eyes moved appraisingly over her transformed appearance. As well as can be expected under the circumstances, she sat in the chair he pulled out for her. "You've been researching all night?" "Indeed." He resumed his seat. "Your letter presents a fascinating conundrum. I've been comparing the map with my own research." Mrs. Winters appeared with a tray of breakfast foods, setting them on the table with practiced efficiency. Nora noticed there were far more options than two people could possibly eat. Eggs, toast, kippers, porridge, fruit. Uncertain which utensils to use for what, Nora watched Dr. Pierce and mirrored his movements. She nearly made it through the meal without incident, until she absent-mindedly said, "This is awesome," after tasting the perfectly prepared eggs. Dr. Pierce's eyebrow quirked. "Awesome? An unusual term to describe breakfast eggs?" Nora blushed. "I meant, they're very good, thank you." After breakfast, they retreated to his study, which looked even more chaotic than the night before. Books were stacked on every surface, and several large maps had been pinned to the walls. "Now, Miss Blackwell, I believe we should lay our cards on the table." Dr. Pierce gestured to the letter and map spread on his desk. "This document contains information that aligns perfectly with research I've been conducting privately for years. Yet I didn't write it. The handwriting is mine, the wording is mine, but I have no memory of writing it." "Because you haven't written it yet," Nora suggested. "At least, not in your experience of time." He leaned against his desk, studying her. "Let us, for the moment, accept your extraordinary claim of time travel. What was your purpose in coming here?" "I didn't come here intentionally. The letter had a strange postmark. When rainwater dripped on it while I was touching it, I was somehow transported here." Dr. Pierce nodded slowly. Water as a conductor for temporal displacement. Fascinating. He moved to a bookshelf and selected a leather-bound volume. "I've been researching unusual water sources for years. Springs, wells, and fountains are reported to have extraordinary properties." He opened the book to reveal handwritten notes and sketches. Most scientists dismiss these as mere folklore or superstition, but patterns emerge when you compare accounts across cultures and centuries. Nora moved closer, professional interest momentarily overriding her personal predicament. "May I?" she asked, reaching for the book. He handed it to her, and she scanned the pages with an archivist's trained eye. "These are sorted chronologically, but have you tried organizing them by symbolic elements? There's a recurring motif here." Dr. Pierce seemed pleasantly surprised by her observation. "I hadn't noticed that." "Show me." For the next hour, they sorted through his research materials, Nora applying her archival organization skills to his years of collected data. They worked side by side at his desk, occasionally reaching for the same document, and their hands brushing. Each time, Nora felt a small jolt that had nothing to do with time travel. "Here," she said, pointing to a symbol on the map. "This appears in a Celtic account from the 9th century, and again in this colonial letter. It consistently represents a doorway or threshold." Dr. Pierce leaned closer, his shoulder pressing against hers as he examined the markings. "You're right. And here, this spiral pattern. It appears whenever water and time are mentioned together." Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. Nora was suddenly acutely aware of how close they were standing, the smell of his cologne of sandalwood and something spicy, and the intensity in his gaze. He cleared his throat and stepped back. "Your expertise is unexpected but valuable. I told you, I'm an archivist." She smiled slightly. "This is what I do. In the future." He said it matter-of-factly, as if he had accepted her claim. "Yes. Tell me, Miss Blackwell, what brought you to Mr. Montgomery's collection in your time?" Harrison Montgomery was a well-known philanthropist and collector. When he died, he left his entire collection to the Boston Athenaeum. I was hired to catalog it. Dr. Pierce frowned. "Mr. Montgomery isn't elderly. He can't be more than 50. In my time, the collection had been in storage for decades after his death." She hesitated. "I probably shouldn't tell you too much about the future." "A wise precaution, perhaps." He returned to the map. "These coordinates point to a network of caves in the Blue Hills. According to the letter, that's where we'll find the fountain of possibilities." "We?" Nora raised an eyebrow. "You possess knowledge from the future and professional expertise that complements my research. I've been searching for this fountain for years." He gave her a challenging look. "Unless you have a better plan for returning to your time?" She didn't. If the mysterious fountain had something to do with her displacement in time, it was her best lead for getting home. "What exactly is this fountain supposed to do?" she asked. Dr. Pierce shrugged. "Legends vary. Some say it grants visions. Others claim it fulfills wishes. A few suggest it allows one to see alternate paths one's life might take. And you believe these legends?" "I believe there's usually a kernel of truth in persistent folklore." He began gathering equipment from around the room and soon held a compass, field glasses, and a few notebooks. "I'll need to arrange transportation and supplies. We can leave tomorrow morning." "Just like that? You're taking me to find a possibly mythical fountain based on a letter that hasn't been written yet?" He paused in his preparations. "Miss Blackwell, I've dedicated my career to cartography because I believe in mapping the unknown. What could be more unknown than this?" He gestured between them. A woman from the future appears with a map to a legendary fountain. Even if I didn't believe your story, which, strangely, I find that I do, my scientific curiosity would demand investigation." Nora found herself smiling. "You're not what I expected from a Victorian gentleman. And what did you expect?" "More skepticism, more resistance to working with a woman." He returned to his desk. "I judge people by the quality of their minds, Miss Blackwell, not the accident of their sex." He handed her a book. "Now, help me prepare for our expedition. We have much to do if we're to find this fountain and solve the mystery of your temporal displacement." As they worked together throughout the day, Nora found herself repeatedly noticing small details about Dr. Pierce, such as the precise way he held his pen, the slight furrow between his brows when he concentrated, and the occasional dry humor that emerged in his comments. By late afternoon, she realized with some alarm that she was developing an attraction to this 19th century cartographer. It was a complication she definitely didn't need. Chapter 5. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect day for an expedition. Nora emerged from the guest room wearing the outfit Mrs. Winters had reluctantly altered for her, which was a practical walking skirt and jacket in forest green with sturdy boots. The housekeeper had made her disapproval clear, but had nonetheless ensured the clothing would be serviceable for their journey. Dr. Pierce's study looked like a supply depot had exploded within it. Equipment was sorted into neat piles: scientific instruments, notebooks and writing materials, camping gear and provisions. "I see you're ready," Dr. Pierce commented, looking up from his list. He was dressed in rugged field clothes, with a leather satchel slung across his chest. "These are for you." He handed her a pair of leather gloves and a modest hat with a small brim. "Thank you." She put them on, completing her transformation into a Victorian lady explorer. The outfit was far more restrictive than her usual jeans and blouse, but she had to admit it suited the adventure. "Mrs. Winters has packed enough food for 3 days, he said, checking items off a list. "I've hired a carriage to take us as far as the roads allow, but we'll need to hike the final distance." The housekeeper appeared in the doorway. "The carriage has arrived, Dr. Pierce." Her gaze shifted to Nora. "I've packed extra bandages and medicinal supplies. The wilderness is no place for a lady, but if you insist on this foolishness, you should at least be prepared." "Your concern is noted, Mrs. Winters," Dr. Pierce replied with surprising gentleness. "We should return within 3 days. If we're delayed, don't concern yourself before a week has passed." The carriage was comfortable, but not luxurious, clearly hired for practical transportation rather than style. As they pulled away from Commonwealth Avenue, Nora found herself pressing close to the window, fascinated by the Boston passing before her eyes. "It's all so different," she murmured, watching pedestrians in Victorian clothing move along streets free of automobiles. Buildings she knew as renovated offices still stood in their original form as residences or shops. "Different from what?" Dr. Pierce asked, watching her with interest. "From my Boston. The bones are the same, like the street layouts in some buildings, but everything else." She shook her head. "It's like seeing a familiar face on a stranger." "Tell me about your Boston." She turned to him. "I shouldn't. Temporal paradoxes and all that." "You've already created a paradox by being here," he pointed out reasonably. "And knowledge of the future may help me understand how to return you to it." She considered this. "True, but let's keep it general. Boston grows significantly. Technology advances in ways that would seem miraculous to you. Transportation, communication, medicine, everything changes. For the better. In many ways. Disease, for instance. Many illnesses that are deadly now are easily curable in my time." His eyes lit with interest. "Truly? Which ones?" "Tuberculosis, typhoid, diphtheria. Even simple infections that might kill someone now can be treated with antibiotics, which are medicines that kill bacteria." "Remarkable." He was silent for a moment, absorbing this. "And what of transportation? These carriages seem inefficient to modern eyes, I imagine." Nora smiled. "We have what you might call horseless carriages. We call them automobiles powered by engines. They can travel at speeds of over 60 miles per hour. Dr. Pierce's eyebrows rose. "That would revolutionize commerce and communication." He paused. "What of flight? Has man conquered the air?" "Yes, we have aircraft that can cross oceans in hours." He shook his head in wonder. "I knew such things must come eventually, but to hear of them as established facts." He looked at her intently. And what of you, Miss Blackwell? What led you to become an archivist in this world of wonders? The personal question surprised her. I've always loved history. The stories of ordinary people, how they lived, what they valued. Archives preserve those stories. She smiled slightly. My father was a history professor. Our family vacations were always to historical sites. And your mother? A librarian. I grew up surrounded by books. A perfect literary pedigree for an archivist, he commented. My own father was a naval officer. His charts and maps fascinated me from childhood. And now you map the unexplored. Indeed, though there's precious little unexplored land left in our modern age. He smiled wryly, hence my interest in more unusual terrain. Their conversation flowed easily as the carriage carried them out of Boston and into the countryside. Nora was struck by how quickly the landscape transformed from urban to rural. Areas that would be dense suburbs in her time were open farmland or woods in 1884. It's so green, she said softly as they passed through what would eventually become a major shopping district. So much open space. Dr. Pierce nodded. Massachusetts is still largely agricultural outside the cities, though that's changing rapidly with industrialization. By mid-afternoon, they reached a small village near the Blue Hills. The carriage pulled up in front of a modest inn with a wooden sign proclaiming it the Wayfarer's Rest. We'll stay here tonight and begin our hike at first light tomorrow, Dr. Pierce explained, helping her down from the carriage. The innkeeper can direct us to a local guide who knows the hills. Inside, the innkeeper, who was a rotund man with mutton chop whiskers, regarded them with obvious curiosity. Room for you and the lady, sir? He asked, his tone suggesting he'd drawn his own conclusions about their relationship as a glance at Nora's ring finger. 2 rooms, if you please, Dr. Pierce corrected firmly. The lady is my research assistant. We're conducting a geographical survey of the area. The innkeeper's expression showed clear disbelief, but he nodded. 2 rooms, then. Dinner's at 6 sharp. He handed over 2 large iron keys. There's a man you might want to speak with. Old Duncan Sullivan knows these hills better than anyone. He lives in a cabin about a quarter mile down the road. He's not right in the head, some say, but if you're looking for strange places in these hills, he's the one to ask. Their rooms were small but clean, with simple furnishings. After refreshing herself, Nora met Dr. Pierce in the inn's dining room, where several other travelers were already seated. I've sent word to Sullivan, he told her as they sat at a corner table. With luck, he'll join us this evening. Dinner was hearty country fare with roasted chicken, vegetables from the kitchen garden, fresh bread with churned butter. As they ate, Dr. Pierce sketched their planned route on a small map. If the coordinates from the letter are correct, the cave entrance should be here, he said, tapping the paper. About 4 hours' hike from the village. And what exactly are we hoping to find? Nora asked. Beyond a fountain, I mean. Before he could answer, a shadow fell across their table. They looked up to find an elderly man standing there, leathery skin creased by decades in the sun, a full white beard framing piercing gray eyes. He wore rough, worn clothes and a battered leather hat. Heard you're looking for me, he said without preamble. Duncan Sullivan. Dr. Pierce stood, offering his hand. Dr. Elliot Pierce, this is Miss Blackwell. Please, join us. Sullivan sat, eyeing them both with undisguised suspicion as he sat down. The innkeeper says you're asking about the hills. What's your interest? We're researching geographical anomalies, Dr. Pierce replied smoothly, particularly cave systems with unusual properties. Sullivan's eyes narrowed. You're looking for the waters. The directness of the statement caught them both off guard. Dr. Pierce recovered first. What waters would those be, Mr. Sullivan? Don't play ignorant with me, Doctor. The old man leaned forward. Nobody comes asking about caves in these hills unless they're looking for the waters that show what could be. Nora and Dr. Pierce exchanged a glance. What do you know about these waters? Nora asked. Sullivan studied her face. You're not from around here. Not from around now either, I'd wager. A chill ran down Nora's spine. What do you mean by that? Got the look about you. Same as the others who came back. He turned to Dr. Pierce. I'll take you as far as the old Bear Rock, but no further. What happens after that is your own doing, and your own undoing. Others? Dr. Pierce pressed. What others? Sullivan stood. Meet me at dawn where the north road turns to dirt. Bring water, food, and proper boots. It's no easy walk. He paused. "And doctor, whatever you think you know about those waters, you don't know the half of it. They show all paths, but choosing one burns the others away forever." With that cryptic warning, he left, leaving Nora and Dr. Pierce staring after him. "Well," Nora said finally, "that was encouraging." Dr. Pierce's eyes gleamed with excitement. "It confirms we're on the right track. The waters that show what could be. That statement perfectly aligns with the legends." Nora wasn't so sure. "He seemed to recognize that I'm not from this time. And what did he mean about others who came back?" "Perhaps we'll find out tomorrow." Dr. Pierce gathered his maps. "Get some rest, Miss Blackwell. Tomorrow promises to be most illuminating." As she prepared for bed in her small room, Nora couldn't shake Sullivan's warning from her mind. Choosing one burns the others away forever. The implications were troubling. What exactly was this fountain of possibilities, and what would it cost to find it? Chapter 6. They met Sullivan at dawn, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten. The old guide nodded approvingly at their preparations of sturdy boots, durable clothing, and bags full with provisions. "Good," he said gruffly. "At least you're not fools about the practical matters." The morning air was crisp, with mist curling around the bases of trees as they set off along a narrow dirt path leading into the hills. Sullivan set a brisk pace, navigating the increasingly rugged terrain with the confidence of long familiarity. Nora's Victorian walking outfit, while more practical than a formal dress, still presented challenges. The heavy split skirt caught on underbrush, and the corset, even loosely laced, restricted her breathing as the path tilted upward. She wished she had left it behind. Dr. Pierce noticed her struggling on a particularly steep section and offered his hand. "The terrain grows more difficult ahead. Please, allow me." Under normal circumstances, Nora might have declined, preferring to manage on her own. But practicality won out, and she placed her gloved hand in his. "Thank you," she said, accepting his assistance over a fallen log. "I'm afraid 19th century women's clothing wasn't designed with hiking in mind. Few limitations are more arbitrary than those society places on women's movement," he replied, surprising her again with his progressive view. "My sister Margaret, whose clothes you're wearing, scandalizes Boston society regularly with her mountaineering expeditions in Switzerland." Nora smiled. "She sounds remarkable." "She is. She'd like you, I think." Sullivan, several paces ahead, snorted. "If you two are finished with your courting talk, you might want to pay attention to the path. It's easy to get lost in these woods if you're not mindful." They fell silent, focusing on the increasingly challenging terrain. The path narrowed, sometimes disappearing altogether, but Sullivan moved confidently, occasionally marking their way with small cairns of stones. After nearly 2 hours of steady climbing, they reached a clearing where a massive boulder sat, weathered into a shape resembling a sleeping bear. "Old Bear Rock," Sullivan announced, dropping his pack to rest. "This is as far as I go." Dr. Pierce frowned. "But the location we seek is still some distance ahead." "That's your concern, not mine." Sullivan took a long drink from his canteen. "I told you, I don't go near those waters." "Why not?" Nora asked. "What happened to make you fear them?" Sullivan's weathered face grew somber. "I wasn't always alone, miss. I had a wife once. She heard the stories about the fountain and insisted we find it." He looked away. "We did. Saw things no person should see. All the paths our lives could take, spilling out before us like rivers from a spring." "What happened?" Dr. Pierce asked quietly. "She drank. Chose a path where she was rich and famous in some distant city. A path didn't include me." His voice grew rough. "She disappeared right before my eyes. She was gone in a flash of light." Nora and Dr. Pierce exchanged glances. "Did she ever return?" Nora asked gently. "No, but others have come back over the years. People appearing in the woods, dressed strange, talking strange, like you." He fixed Nora with a penetrating stare. "You've got the same look about you. You're not from here. You're not from now." "Mr. Sullivan," Dr. Pierce began, but the old man cut him off with a wave of his hand. "From here, follow the stream uphill until you find stones marked with spirals. After that, look for a waterfall behind a stand of 3 white birches. The cave entrance is there." He shouldered his pack. "I'll wait here until sunset. If you haven't returned by then, I'll tell the innkeeper to send help in the morning." "Thank you for bringing us this far," Dr. Pierce said, offering his hand. Sullivan ignored it. "Don't thank me. Just heed my warning. Choosing one path burns away all others. Make sure whatever you choose is worth what you lose." With that, he turned and settled himself against the old bare rock, clearly intending to go no further. As they continued on alone, following the stream as directed, Nora mulled over Sullivan's words. "Do you believe his story?" she asked. "That his wife disappeared after drinking from the fountain? Given that you appeared in my study claiming to be from the future, I'm inclined to keep an open mind." Dr. Pierce helped her over a difficult stretch of rocky terrain. "The question is, if this fountain truly allows temporal displacement, could it send you home? Or did it bring me here in the first place?" Nora added. "The letter had that strange postmark, and it was water that sparked the transition." They hiked in companionable silence for a time, the only sounds their footsteps and the bubbling stream beside them. The forest grew denser, older somehow, the trees larger and more gnarled. "Look," Dr. Pierce said suddenly, pointing to a weathered oak tree. "Is that one of the markings Sullivan mentioned?" Carved into the bark was a spiral symbol, identical to one they had seen on the map. Nora traced it with her fingertips. "It looks ancient. Let me see the map again." She extracted it from her bag, and they studied it together, heads bent close. "If I'm reading this correctly, we're approaching the final landmark before the cave entrance." Their path grew steeper and rockier, requiring them to climb more than walk in some sections. Dr. Pierce reached back repeatedly to offer Nora his hand, and after the third such instance, he didn't let go. They continued hand in hand, neither acknowledging this development, but neither pulling away. "Tell me about your work in your time," he said as they navigated a particularly challenging slope. "What discoveries have been made about this period that I might find interesting?" Nora considered what she could safely reveal. "Well, your cartographical work becomes quite renowned. Several of your maps of the New England coast are still referenced in my time." He looked pleased but not vain about this information. "And what of your personal history? Is there someone waiting for your return?" The question caught her off guard. "No. My last relationship ended 2 years ago. He was a professor of literature who found my obsession with dusty archives tedious." "The man sounds like a fool," Dr. Pierce said with unexpected vehemence. Nora smiled. "What about you? No young lady waiting at home?" "No." He helped her over a fallen log. "I was engaged once to a banker's daughter. Her name was Caroline Winthrop. We had compatible backgrounds and interests, or so I thought. When I began pursuing research into what she called superstitious nonsense, she ended our engagement." "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "Don't be. It was for the best. I've found that solitude suits my work." "Does it?" Nora asked softly. "Suit you, I mean?" Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Before he could answer, they emerged into a small clearing where 3 white birches stood in a perfect line, as if planted deliberately. Beyond them, Nora could hear the sound of falling water. "The waterfall," Dr. Pierce said, his voice reflecting his excitement. "We're close." They circled around the birches and found themselves facing a rock wall down which water cascaded into a small pool. The setting was picturesque, peaceful. "It's beautiful," Nora said, "but I don't see a cave entrance." Dr. Pierce studied the scene with a cartographer's eye. Sullivan said behind the waterfall, "Let's look more closely." They approached the waterfall cautiously. It wasn't large, perhaps 15 feet high and 6 feet wide, but the rocks around it were slippery with moss and spray. "There." Dr. Pierce pointed. "Do you see it? An opening behind the water." Nora squinted against the sun's reflection on the cascade. "You're right. How do we get to it without getting soaked?" "I don't think we can." He began removing his jacket. "We'll have to make a dash through the edge of the fall." Nora eyed her heavy Victorian skirt doubtfully. "These clothes will weigh a ton when wet." "We should make camp here and dry our things afterward," Dr. Pierce suggested, gesturing to the clearing. "It's nearly evening anyway, and I'd prefer to explore the cave system with fresh energy tomorrow." They set about making camp, working together with an ease that belied their short acquaintance. Dr. Pierce erected a small tent while Nora gathered firewood and prepared a simple meal from their provisions. As they sat beside the fire, the sun setting beyond the hills, Nora found herself studying Dr. Pierce's profile in the flickering light. There was something about him that drew her. His intelligence, certainly, but also his openness to possibilities, and his lack of the rigid thinking that characterized many of his contemporaries. "You're staring, Miss Blackwell." His voice was soft but amused. "Nora," she said suddenly. "Please, call me Nora. Miss Blackwell feels so formal when we're camping in the wilderness together." He smiled, the firelight catching in his eyes. "Nora, then. And I'm Elliot." "Elliot," she repeated, testing the name. "It suits you. May I ask you something personal, Nora?" When she nodded, he continued. "What is it like living in your time? Not the technology or the science, but what is it like to be you, there?" The question was unexpectedly profound. Nora poked at the fire with a stick, gathering her thoughts. "It's complicated. We have freedoms and opportunities that women of your time couldn't imagine. I live alone, support myself through my work, make my own decisions. But sometimes it feels disconnected. Digital technology, those screens and networks I mentioned, they connect people but also isolate them. You felt isolated, even surrounded by people. Sometimes, especially, when surrounded by people," she met his gaze across the fire. "I've always felt more at home in the past than in my present. That's why I became an archivist." "And now you're actually in the past," he observed. "Is it what you expected?" She laughed softly. "Hardly. I expected to study the past, not live in it, but..." She hesitated. "There are aspects that I find unexpectedly appealing, such as..." She was saved from answering by a distant rumble of thunder. "A storm is coming," she said instead. "We should secure the camp." They worked quickly to ensure their supplies were protected, but the storm had moved off by the time they finished, apparently passing to the north. As they prepared to retire, an awkward moment arose regarding sleeping arrangements. The tent was small, intended for one person or two people who were considerably more intimate than they were. "You take the tent," Elliot said firmly. "I'll sleep by the fire." "That's ridiculous. We're both adults. We can share the tent without impropriety." Even as she said it, Nora realized how scandalous such an arrangement would be by Victorian standards. Elliot raised an eyebrow. "Are the social conventions of your time so different?" "Yes and no. But practical considerations should outweigh social ones out here." She gestured to the darkening sky. "If it does rain, we'll both need shelter." In the end, they compromised. The tent was just large enough for them to lie side by side without touching, a carefully placed satchel forming a symbolic barrier between them. As they lay in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the forest, Nora found herself acutely aware of Elliot's presence inches away. His breathing, the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with wood smoke, and the occasional rustle as he shifted position. All of it filled her senses. "Are you awake?" she whispered. "Yes. Tomorrow, we might find a way for me to return home." There was a long pause before he replied, "Yes, that seems likely. I'm not sure how I feel about that anymore." Another pause, longer this time. "Nor am I." In the quiet darkness of the tent, those simple words held volumes. Nora felt a profound confusion overtaking her. She had known this man for only 3 days, yet the connection between them seemed to transcend their brief acquaintance. If the fountain could indeed send her home, would she take that opportunity without hesitation? She wasn't sure, and that uncertainty troubled her deeply as she finally drifted into uneasy sleep. Chapter 7. Morning light filtered through the canvas, waking Nora from a dream about flowing water and shifting doorways. She opened her eyes to find herself alone in the tent, Elliot's side empty. Outside, she found him already dressed and tending to a small breakfast fire. His hair was damp, his shirt collar open at the throat. "Good morning," he greeted her. "I've tested the path behind the waterfall. The cave entrance is accessible, though we'll get rather wet in the crossing." Nora accepted the cup of coffee he offered. "Did you sleep at all?" "Some." His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "I was thinking about what we might find in the cave." After a simple breakfast, they prepared for the expedition. Elliot had rigged a waterproof covering for their lanterns and matches, and they packed only the essentials of water, some food, and a few scientific instruments. "Ready?" Elliot asked as they stood before the waterfall. Nora nodded, lifting her skirt slightly to keep them from dragging. "Ready." They moved quickly through the edge of the cascade, the cold water shocking against Nora's skin. Behind the falling water was a narrow opening in the rock face, just wide enough for a person to enter sideways. Elliot lit the lanterns once they were inside, the yellow glow revealing a tunnel that extended deeper into the hillside. The air was cool and damp, with a mineral scent that reminded Nora of underground springs she'd visited as a child. Limestone formation, Elliot observed, holding his lantern higher to illuminate the ceiling. Likely formed by water erosion over thousands of years. They moved cautiously forward, the tunnel occasionally widening into small chambers before narrowing again. Elliot led the way, pointing out features of geological interest, while Nora noted markings that suggested human presence, such as crude carvings in the rock and the remains of ancient torches. People have been coming here for centuries, she said, examining a particularly well-preserved carving of a spiral pattern. This symbol matches one from the map. Elliot crouched beside her, their shoulders touching as they studied the carving. Indeed. And look. He directed his lantern toward a higher section of wall, where primitive paintings depicted human figures gathered around a circular pool, their hands extended toward glowing water. The fountain? Nora suggested. It seems likely. Elliot stood, consulting a specialized compass he had brought. According to this and the map, we should continue eastward. As they ventured deeper, the cave system became more complex, with multiple tunnels branching off the main passage. Elliot marked their route with chalk to ensure they could find their way back. How much archaeological training do you have? Nora asked, as they examined what appeared to be deliberate stone arrangements in one chamber. Some. I joined several expeditions to Egypt and Greece in my 20s. He smiled ruefully. My interest in mapping extended to what lies beneath, as well as above ground. They continued through a series of increasingly impressive chambers, some with stalactites and stalagmites that had formed into cathedral-like columns over millennia. In one vast room, unusual blue-green fungi grew in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, creating a faint luminescence. I've never seen anything like this, Nora murmured, careful not to touch the strange growths. Do you think it's natural? I'm not certain, Elliot admitted. The patterns suggest intentional cultivation, but by whom? And for what purpose? We were traversing a narrow ledge alongside a deep chasm when disaster nearly struck. Nora's foot landed on a loose stone, and suddenly she was falling, a scream torn from her throat as the abyss opened beneath her. Elliot's reaction was instantaneous. He lunged, catching her wrist with one hand while anchoring himself against the cave wall with the other. For one terrifying moment, they hung suspended between safety and a deadly fall. With a tremendous effort, Elliot pulled her back onto the ledge, the momentum carrying them both against the wall. They clung to each other, hearts racing, bodies pressed together in the aftermath of fear. Are you hurt? Elliot asked, his voice rough with concern, his hands moving over her arms and shoulders as if checking for injuries. No, I'm all right. Nora was trembling, as much from the intensity of his gaze as from the near-fatal fall. You saved my life. If anything had happened to you... He didn't complete the thought, but his arms tightened around her. They stayed that way for long moments, neither willing to break the connection. Finally, Nora spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Elliot, I don't understand what's happening between us. We've known each other for so short a time. Yet it feels as though I've been waiting for you without knowing what I was waiting for. His hand moved to her cheek. I've never met anyone who understands my work, my passions, as you do. I feel the same, she admitted. But I'm from another time, another world, essentially. Perhaps that's why. You see beyond the constraints of this time, just as I've always tried to do. His thumb traced her cheekbone. In 3 days, you've become more important to me than people I've known my entire life. I can't explain it rationally. We should continue, Nora said reluctantly, though she made no move to extract herself from his embrace. We're close to the fountain. I can feel it, somehow. With visible effort, Elliot released her, though he kept hold of her hand as they resumed their cautious progress. After another half-hour of careful navigation, they came upon a set of ancient stone steps carved into the cave floor, descending toward the sound of running water. The steps led to a massive underground chamber, where a perfectly circular pool, about 10 feet across, glowed with an internal blue-green light. Around the pool, stone carvings in dozens of ancient languages covered the walls from floor to ceiling. The fountain of possibilities, Elliot breathed, his voice filled with wonder. They approached slowly, the otherworldly light casting their shadows in strange patterns across the chamber. The pool itself was perfectly still, like glass, yet somehow gave the impression of movement when not directly observed. "It's beautiful," Nora whispered, feeling as though speaking loudly might shatter the magic of the place. Elliot moved to the carvings, running his fingers along the ancient inscriptions. These are in languages spanning thousands of years: Latin, Greek, Celtic, Ogham, what appears to be ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, and even what might be Sumerian cuneiform. "Can you read any of it?" Nora asked, joining him. He nodded slowly. "Fragments. This section in Latin says, 'To see all paths, touch the waters together. To choose one path, drink together.'" Nora's heart quickened. "Touch the waters to see? Drink to choose? What does that mean?" "I believe it means the fountain shows possibilities, potential futures or paths, when touched. But to actually travel one of those paths requires drinking the water." Elliot moved around the pool, examining more inscriptions. "There are warnings here too. What is seen cannot be unseen. What is chosen cannot be unchosen." Nora remembered Sullivan's warning. Choosing one path burns the others away forever. "Should we test it?" she asked, looking at the glowing water. "Just touch it. I mean..." Elliot hesitated. "It seems the logical next step in our investigation, but I sense we should be prepared for something significant." They knelt on opposite sides of the pool, the strange light illuminating their faces from below. The water was perfectly clear, yet seemed to contain depths far greater than the shallow basin should allow. "Together," Elliot suggested, holding his hand above the surface. Nora nodded, extending her own hand. "Together." Their fingertips broke the surface in perfect unison. The effect was immediate and overwhelming, the chamber filled with swirling mist that coalesced into vivid, three-dimensional scenes surrounding them. It was as if the walls of the cave had dissolved, replaced by windows into dozens of different realities playing out simultaneously. In one scene, Nora saw herself in Victorian clothing, standing beside Elliot at what appeared to be a scientific exhibition. He was presenting their findings to an appreciative audience, her hand resting proudly on his arm. In another, she was back in her modern apartment, alone, looking at historical documents about Dr. Elliot Pierce, who had mysteriously disappeared during an expedition in 1884. A third showed Elliot in modern clothing, marveling at skyscrapers and technology, walking hand in hand with her through contemporary Boston. Dozens more visions swirled around them. Lives where they were together, lives where they were apart, futures spanning both their time periods. In some they had children, in others they pursued separate paths. The possibilities seemed endless, each as real and vibrant as the next. Then came a vision more sobering than the rest, a demonstration of what choosing meant. One path solidifying into reality, while all others faded and dissolved, erased from existence as completely as if they had never been possible. The visions vanished as suddenly as they had appeared, leaving Nora and Elliot collapsed at the pool's edge, reaching for each other across the glowing water. "Did you see?" Nora began, her voice unsteady. "Everything," Elliot confirmed, his face pale in the blue-green light. "All possible futures, all possible paths." They stared at each other across the fountain, both shaken to their cores by what they had witnessed. The magnitude of the choice before them was staggering. Not just which time period to live in, but which of the countless possible lives they might share would become real, at the cost of all others ceasing to exist. Elliot extended his hand again, not to the water this time, but to Nora. "I think we need to discuss what we've seen before we make any decisions." Nora took his hand, grateful for the solid reality of his touch after the disorienting visions. "Yes, this is bigger than I expected." They retreated from the chamber in silence, each lost in thoughts of the lives they had glimpsed, lives together, lives apart. An infinity of possibilities hanging in the balance of their decision. Chapter 8. Neither spoke as they made their way back through the cave system to the entrance. The afternoon sun seemed harsh and ordinary after the ethereal glow of the fountain chamber. They emerged from behind the waterfall, soaked once again, but barely noticing the discomfort. Elliot mechanically rekindled their campfire from the morning's embers, while Nora spread her damp outer skirt to dry. They moved about these practical tasks like sleepwalkers, both still processing the overwhelming visions they had shared. Finally, as they sat before the fire with cups of strong tea, Elliot broke the silence. "I saw lifetimes," he said quietly. "Hundreds of possible paths our lives might take." Nora nodded. "I saw them too. Us in your time, in my time, together, separate, happy endings and less happy ones." "What did you make of the visions where we were together in your time?" Elliot asked, his eyes studying her face carefully. "I saw myself adapting to your world. I learned how to use those glowing communication devices, traveled in horseless carriages, and even flew in those massive metal birds that cross oceans." "Airplanes," Nora supplied with a small smile. "You seemed fascinated by everything, challenged but thriving. And in the visions where you remained here, in my time?" Nora sipped her tea, remembering. "I saw myself in beautiful Victorian gowns, helping with your research and writing books of my own. In some visions, we traveled the world together, documenting unexplained phenomena." She hesitated. "We looked happy." "We did," Elliot agreed. He set down his cup and moved to sit beside her on the fallen log she was using as a bench. "But there's more to consider than our personal happiness." "The warning," Nora said, understanding. "Choosing one path erases all others. It's not just about which time period we prefer, but about the consequences of our choice for everyone else." "Precisely." Elliot gazed into the fire. "If you return to your time alone, I continue my life here. Perhaps I make certain discoveries and influence certain events. People who might be born as a result of my actions here would never exist if I left with you. And if you came with me to the future, your absence from this time might change history in ways we can't predict," Nora frowned. "Although we saw visions of both scenarios, which suggests either choice is possible without catastrophic consequences. The fountain shows what could be, not necessarily what should be." Elliot turned to face her fully. "Nora, there's something I need to tell you, something that may affect your decision." "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "Last night, when you were asleep, I checked your modern device, your phone. It still had some power, and I was able to access information about myself." Nora's eyes widened. "Elliot, you shouldn't have—" "I know, and I apologize for the invasion of privacy, but I needed to understand what happens to me in your timeline." His expression grew serious. "According to historical records, Dr. Elliot Pierce disappears during an expedition in August 1884, never to be seen again. My body is never found." Nora felt a chill that had nothing to do with her damp clothing. "That's this month? This expedition?" "Yes, which suggests to me that perhaps I meant to go with you to the future, that my disappearance from history is already accounted for." "Or it could mean you die in these caves," Nora countered. "The records just say you disappeared, not that you time traveled." They fell silent again, the weight of their potential choices hanging between them. "There's something else we need to discuss," Nora said finally. "I've been hiding something from you, something important." Elliot waited patiently as she gathered her thoughts. "I'm not just an archivist in the future. I specialize specifically in your era, in the history of New England from 1880 to 1900. She met his eyes directly. "I've studied your work. In my time, you're remembered as a brilliant cartographer whose career was cut short by your mysterious disappearance." Understanding dawned on his face. "That's why you knew so much about my research, why you could make connections I hadn't seen yet." "Yes. And why I was able to adapt to this time period relatively quickly." She touched his arm hesitantly. "I've admired your work for years, studied your maps and read your papers. Meeting you has been surreal." "Is that all it's been?" he asked softly. "Professional admiration for a historical figure?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. "No," she admitted. "It's become much more than that." Elliot took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I've spent my life mapping the physical world, documenting what exists. But in 3 days with you, I've discovered terrain I never knew existed inside myself." "Elliot, let me finish, please." His voice was gentle but determined. "I've always been considered unusual, even eccentric for my interests and beliefs. I've never quite fit into the world I was born into. Then you appeared, literally from another time, and suddenly everything made sense. It's as if I've been waiting for you without knowing what I was waiting for." Nora felt tears threatening. "I've felt the same connection, but is that enough reason to alter the course of history? To erase potential futures for others? That's the question, isn't it?" Elliot released her hand reluctantly. "We should rest. Return to the fountain tomorrow with clear heads." They prepared for sleep with the same arrangement as the previous night, side by side in the small tent with a satchel between them. But this time, as darkness fell, Nora reached across the divide and found Elliot's hand. He clasped it tightly, a lifeline connecting them as they drifted into uneasy sleep, filled with dreams of possible futures. Chapter 9. In the morning they awoke still holding hands. The symbolic barrier between them somehow moved aside during the night. For a moment, they simply looked at each other in the dim light filtering through the canvas, neither speaking nor moving, both acutely aware of the intimacy of the moment. "We should return to the fountain," Elliot said finally, his voice rough with sleep and emotion. They hiked back to the waterfall in companionable silence, each lost in thought. The journey through the cave system seemed shorter this time, their familiarity with the route allowing quicker progress. When they reached the fountain chamber, however, they found something had changed. The pool's glow had intensified, its light pulsing gently like a heartbeat, and a fine mist had begun to rise from its surface. "The energy is building," Elliot observed, approaching cautiously. "I suspect we have a limited window to make our decision." "Wait," Nora said, studying the chamber more carefully. "Look there, behind those stalactites. Is that another passage?" Elliot directed his lantern toward where she was pointing, revealing a narrow opening they had missed during their first visit. "Good eye. Let's investigate before we approach the fountain again." The passage led to a smaller chamber containing additional inscriptions and what appeared to be offerings left by previous visitors. There were ancient coins, primitive jewelry, fragments of pottery, and more recent items including a pocket watch, a silver cameo, and a gentleman's calling card dated 1872. "Others who made their choice," Nora murmured, examining the artifacts without touching them. Elliot was studying the inscriptions on the wall. "This clarifies much," he said after several minutes. "According to these texts, the fountain can only be used once by any person. Once you've made your choice, you can never return to change it." "That fits with Sullivan's warning," Nora noted. "There's more." Elliot outlined the carvings with his fingertips. "The waters know truth from falsehood. Only those whose hearts align may choose together." "What does that mean?" "I believe it means we must be genuinely united in our choice for it to work for both of us." He turned to her, his expression serious. "We can't just say what we think the other wants to hear. We must truly desire the same outcome." Nora felt the weight of this revelation. "So we need to be absolutely honest with each other about what we want." "Yes." Elliot took both her hands in his. "Nora, what do you truly want? If you could choose any of the futures we saw, which calls to you most?" The question hung between them, demanding complete honesty. Nora closed her eyes, searching her heart for the truth. "I've spent my life studying history, trying to connect with the past," she said slowly. "But I've never felt as alive, as present, as I have these past few days with you." She opened her eyes to meet his gaze directly. "The future that calls to me most is the one where we're together. The time period seems secondary to that." Relief and joy flooded Elliot's face. "I feel the same. I've always been searching for something beyond the mapped world, something more meaningful than coordinates and elevations." His hands tightened around hers. "I found it the moment you appeared in my study." A rumbling sound from the main chamber interrupted them. The fountain's glow was visible even from their secondary chamber, its light now pulsing rapidly. "We need to decide," Elliot said urgently. "The fountain's energy is peaking." They returned to the main chamber to find the mist from the pool rising to form a swirling column above the water. The light had intensified to an almost painful brightness. "Which time?" Nora asked, shouting above the growing rumble of energy. "Your past or my future?" Elliot's eyes never left hers. "Your future. I've mapped all I can in this time. Now I want to map a future with you." "Are you sure? You'd be leaving everything you know." "I've studied the unknown my entire life, Nora. Let me explore the greatest unknown of all, the future, with you by my side. The conviction in his voice left no doubt about his sincerity. Nora felt a surge of joy mixed with a tinge of fear at the enormity of what they were choosing. "Then it's decided," she said, squeezing his hands. "We go forward together." They approached the fountain, the mist swirling around them as they knelt at its edge. The water was now in constant motion, rippling outward from the center in perfect concentric circles. "According to the inscriptions," Elliot said, raising his voice over the increasing rumble, "we must drink together to choose our path." Nora nodded, remembering the ancient words, "To see all paths, touch the waters together. To choose one path, drink together." They cupped their hands and dipped them into the glowing water. It felt neither hot nor cold, but tingled against their skin with an energy that seemed to vibrate at a cellular level. "Ready?" Elliot asked, his eyes locked with hers. "Ready." Nora raised her cupped hands toward her lips. Together, they drank the shimmering water of the fountain of possibilities. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. The chamber dissolved around them, replaced by a tunnel of swirling light and color. Nora felt Elliot's hand grab hers as they were pulled through the fabric of time itself, the sensation both terrifying and exhilarating. Images flashed past, too quickly to comprehend. Glimpses of years, decades, and centuries rushing by in reverse. Nora had the distinct impression of time being rewound and then fast forward, as if the universe were finding the proper place to deposit them. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the maelstrom ceased. Darkness fell, and Nora knew no more. Chapter 10. Nora awoke to the sound of rain pattering against a roof. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure where or when she was. Then memory flooded back and she sat up with a gasp. She was lying on the floor of Dr. Montgomery's attic, the leak in the ceiling still dripping steadily. Beside her, Elliot lay unconscious, his Victorian clothing a stark contrast to the modern setting. "Elliot?" She shook him gently, fear gripping her heart. Had the journey through time harmed him somehow? His eyelids fluttered, then opened. He looked around in confusion before focusing on her face. "Nora, We're in my time," she confirmed, helping him sit up. "In the attic, where I found the letter." Elliot took in their surroundings with wonder. The electric lighting, the hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic outside. "It worked," he breathed. "We truly traveled through time." Nora checked her phone, which was now fully operational again. The date showed that only 20 minutes had passed since she had first touched the mysterious postmark. "It's still the same day I left," she said in amazement. "August 7th, 2023. Elliot struggled to his feet, still unsteady. His gaze moved from object to object. The plastic storage containers, the fluorescent light fixtures, and the metal folding table with her laptop on it. Everything ordinary to Nora was extraordinary to him. "The illumination," he said, staring at the ceiling lights. "It's so even, so bright, not like gas lamps at all." "Electric lighting," Nora explained, rising to stand beside him. "Are you all right? Any dizziness or pain?" "I'm overwhelmed," he admitted, "but physically intact, I believe." A door slammed somewhere in the house below, making them both jump. "That's probably the caretaker," Nora said in alarm. "We need to get you out of here. Your clothing will attract too much attention." She quickly gathered Elliot's Victorian outfit, an unusual addition to the artifacts she'd already catalogued, and stuffed it into her large messenger bag, along with the letter that had started everything. She helped Elliot into her spare raincoat, which was slightly too small for him, but would at least partially conceal his period clothing. "Follow my lead and try not to look too amazed by everything," she instructed as they made their way down the attic stairs. They managed to leave the Montgomery mansion without encountering the caretaker, but stepping onto the street presented a new challenge. Elliot froze at the sight of cars moving past, his eyes wide with fear and fascination. "Horseless carriages," he murmured. "So many, and so fast." Nora took his arm, guiding him along the sidewalk. "Remember, those are automobiles, cars for short. They're how most people get around now." Elliot only nodded as his head swiveled constantly as he tried to take in everything at once. The modern clothing of passers-by, the tall buildings, the traffic signals, people talking on phones. When an airplane passed overhead, he actually stopped walking to stare upward in wonder. "A flying machine," he breathed. "You told me of these, but seeing one..." "There will be time for all of this," Nora promised, gently urging him along. But right now, we need to get to my apartment, where we can figure out our next steps." The subway presented another shock. Elliot gripped Nora's hand tightly as they descended into the station, his scientific curiosity warring with instinctive alarm at the noise and crowds. "An underground railway," he observed as a train arrived, wind rushing ahead of it. "Remarkable engineering." During the short ride to her stop, Nora noticed several people giving Elliot curious glances. His bearing and manner of speaking were as anachronistic as his partially concealed clothing. He, meanwhile, was studying everyone and everything with the intense observation of an anthropologist in an undiscovered tribe. Nora's apartment was a modest one-bedroom in a converted Victorian house. Ironically, not far from where Elliot's home had stood in 1884. When she unlocked the door and led him inside, he stood in the center of the living room, turning slowly to take it all in. "Your home," he said softly, just as I glimpsed in the visions. The walls were lined with bookshelves, natural light streamed through large windows, and comfortable, slightly mismatched furniture gave the space a lived-in feeling. Historical prints and maps hung on the walls, including, Nora now realized with a start, one of Elliot's own maps of the Massachusetts coastline. "It's not much, but it's mine," she said, suddenly self-conscious about her small, cluttered space. "It's wonderful." Elliot approached her bookshelves, examining the titles with interest. "So many books, on subjects I don't recognize." Nora set down her bag and faced the practical reality of their situation. "Elliot, we need to talk about what happens next. You're here, in 2023, with no identity, no records, no history that anyone would believe." He turned from the bookshelf. "Yes, I've been considering that problem. I'll need documentation, a plausible background." He smiled slightly. "Perhaps I could be a very dedicated historical reenactor who's decided to remain in character." Despite the stress of their situation, Nora laughed. "That might work for explaining some behaviors, but we'll need something more substantial for legal purposes." They spent the rest of the evening addressing immediate concerns. Nora ordered delivery food, another marvel that left Elliot speechless, found him some modern clothing that a previous boyfriend had left behind, and began sketching out a plan for creating a workable identity for him. "We could say you're a research colleague from England," she suggested as they sat at her small dining table. "Your accent could pass for British with some practice. We'd need to create documents, which isn't strictly legal, but under the circumstances." Elliot was only half listening, distracted by the wonders of modern plumbing in her bathroom and the remarkable convenience of electric lighting that turned on with a flip of a switch. "Elliot, focus," she said gently. "This is important. I apologize." He returned his attention to her. "It's just, everything is so extraordinary. The progress humanity has made in 139 years exceeds even my most optimistic projections." "Not all progress has been positive," Nora reminded him. "But there's time to discuss all that. Right now, we need to secure your place in this world." As evening turned to night, the practical challenges began to seem less daunting than the emotional reality of what they had done. Elliot paced Nora's living room, occasionally stopping to examine some modern object, a remote control, a laptop computer, a digital clock, before resuming his restless movement. "Have I made a terrible mistake?" he asked suddenly. "Abandoning my time, my work, everything I knew?" Nora approached him cautiously. "Are you having regrets already?" "Not regrets. More the weight of comprehension. I've erased my own history. For all intents and purposes, Dr. Elliot Pierce ceased to exist in 1884. "Not entirely," Nora said, leading him to her laptop. "Look." She opened her browser and searched for his name, bringing up digital archives of his published maps and papers. "Your work survived. Your contributions to cartography are still recognized. You're remembered as brilliant but mysterious, disappearing at the height of your career." Elliot stared at the screen, seeing his own work digitized and preserved across more than a century. "My maps survived," he murmured. "And look, citations by later cartographers. My work influenced others." "Exactly. You didn't erase your history, you just left it early." He touched the screen gently, as if trying to connect with his past through the digital interface. "What of those who knew me? Mrs. Winters? My sister Margaret?" Nora hesitated. "They would have mourned you, I'm sure, but they would have continued their lives." She took his hand. "Elliot, if you're having second thoughts." "No," his voice was firm. I chose this path with open eyes. The adjustment is simply more jolting than I anticipated. They stayed up late into the night, Elliot asking endless questions about the modern world, Nora doing her best to explain technologies and social changes that most people took for granted. When exhaustion finally overtook them, Nora insisted Elliot take the bedroom while she slept on the couch. "We may have shared a tent in the wilderness, but this is a different situation entirely," she said when he protested. "My 21st century reputation can withstand a gentleman staying over, but there are still boundaries." Chapter 11. Alone on her couch, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of someone else moving about in her bedroom, Nora reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. 3 days ago, she had been an ordinary archivist with a predictable routine. Now she had literally rewritten history, bringing a Victorian scientist into the modern world. And she had chosen this, not just for professional interest or historical curiosity, but because in those brief days, she had developed feelings for Elliot that defied rational explanation. The enormity of their choice settled over her as she drifted towards sleep. They had seen countless possible futures and chosen one, erasing all others from existence. Now they would have to live with that choice, for better or worse. Morning brought the smell of brewing coffee and the sound of Elliot experimenting with her kitchen appliances. She found him fully dressed in the borrowed modern clothes, examining her coffee maker with scientific interest. "This device is remarkably efficient," he observed, "though I confess I pressed several buttons before determining the correct sequence." "You figured it out better than some modern people I know." Nora accepted the cup he offered. "How did you sleep?" "Intermittently. Your world is rather noisy compared to mine, and your mattress is unusually soft." He smiled slightly, though I suspect that's a complaint few in my time would sympathize with. They spent that day and the next navigating the beginnings of Elliot's integration into the 21st century. Nora took a week of emergency leave from work, claiming a family situation, to help him adjust to basics: modern clothing, technology, transportation, social norms. Elliot proved to be a remarkably quick study. His scientific mind approached modern technology as puzzles to be solved, rather than magic to be feared. By the third day, he had mastered the basics of her smartphone, figured out the television remote, and was cautiously navigating the internet under her guidance. "The sum total of human knowledge at one's fingertips," he marveled, scrolling through an online encyclopedia. "This alone would justify my decision to come forward in time." There were challenges, of course. Modern slang confused him, the pace of life overwhelmed him, and social norms regarding gender, race, and sexuality sometimes left him speechless, though he adapted with surprising openness. "I was considered progressive in my time," he explained when Nora expressed surprise at his quick acceptance of same-sex marriage. "But even my most liberal views would be considered hopelessly antiquated by your standards. I must evolve." The most profound moment came when Nora took him to the Boston Public Library, where a special collection housed some of his original maps. Watching Elliot stand before glass cases containing his own work, preserved for nearly a century and a half, moved her deeply. "It's surreal," he whispered, staring at a map of Boston Harbor he had created in 1882. "This is unmistakably my hand, my notations. Yet here it sits, an historical artifact." "A significant one," Nora told him, showing him the curatorial notes. "Your mapping techniques were ahead of their time. Several of your innovations in representing coastal depths became standard practice decades after your disappearance." As they left the library, Elliot stopped on the steps, looking out over modern Boston, a skyline his 1884 self could never have imagined. "We made the right choice," he said quietly. "Difficult as the adjustment has been, I feel it more strongly each day. I belong here, with you, now." Nora slipped her hand into his. "I feel the same way." By the end of the week, they had established a workable narrative for Elliot's presence in the modern world. He would be Dr. E.P. Richards, a British historical specialist who had worked primarily in private collections overseas. His traditional manner and occasional social awkwardness could be attributed to an isolated academic upbringing. Creating documentation was more challenging but not impossible, in an age where digital skills could overcome many obstacles. Nora had a friend in IT security who, for a substantial fee and under a vow of secrecy, helped create the basic digital footprint Elliot would need. "It's not perfect," Nora admitted, "but it should hold up to routine scrutiny. The rest will build over time. As they settled into a tentative new normal, the question of their relationship loomed larger. They had chosen to be together across time itself, yet in the rush of practical concerns, they had barely addressed the growing feelings between them. One evening, as they sat together on Nora's small balcony, watching the sunset over modern Boston, Elliot finally broached the subject. "Nora, we've discussed my documentation, my adaptation, my future career possibilities," he began carefully, "but we haven't discussed us, the nature of our relationship going forward." She turned to face him. "What do you want it to be?" "In my time, I would court you properly. Chaperoned outings, formal declarations of intent." He smiled ruefully. "But we're rather past that stage, aren't we? Having camped together, traveled through time together, and now shared your home." "Slightly past it, yes." Nora returned his smile. "Modern relationships move at a different pace anyway. So, I've gathered from your television programs." He reached for her hand. "But some things remain constant across time. The desire to build a life with someone who understands you, who challenges and supports you in equal measure. Is that what you want with me?" Nora asked, softly. "It's why I'm here, why I left everything I knew." His eyes held hers steadily. "I love you, Nora. It defies logical explanation given the brevity of our acquaintance, but I suspect time travel rarely follows conventional logic." Nora felt tears welling in her eyes. "I love you too, and you're right. It doesn't make rational sense, but then neither does anything else about our situation." Elliot leaned forward, kissing her with a gentleness that belied the intensity of his words. When they parted, the last rays of sunset were gilding the city skyline. "There will be challenges ahead," he said, keeping her hand in his. "My adjustment to this time won't always be smooth. There will be moments when the weight of what we've done, the paths we've erased, may haunt us." "I know," Nora squeezed his hand. "But we'll face those challenges together. After all, we've already done the impossible. Everything else should be relatively simple in comparison." As night fell over Boston, they remained on the balcony, talking about their future. A future they had chosen together at the cost of all other possibilities. It would not be an easy path, but it was theirs, and they would walk it side by side.